We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, we are still deliberating on House Bill 3408 under Committee Report Number 9. This is the 2017 national budget. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of interpellation on the different departments. Under the agenda this morning, the budgets of the following departments and touch agencies are up. Office of the Vice President, other executive offices including Housing and Land Regulatory Board and Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council, budgetary support to government corporations, National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation, National Housing Authority, and Social Finance Corporation. Then the Department of Social Welfare and Development, the Department of Education, Department of Energy, Energy Regulatory Commission, DOE-attached corporations, later on, the Department of Justice and the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund, and the Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. So we may start off with the Office of the Vice President. Mr. President, may I ask that the Chairman of the Committee on Finance be recognized to present the budget of the Office of the Vice President. Senator Loren Legarda, please.
Senator Loren Legarda is recognized to present the budget of the Office of the Vice President. Senator Legarda.
Yes, Mr. President. The Office of the Vice President, the Chief of Staff of the Vice President is here today. She is not available today or is reportedly ill. And there are no interpellations on the budget of the Office of the Vice President.
Sorry.
There are no...
For the record, can the sponsor state for the record the budget of the Office of the Vice President?
The total appropriation for the Office of the Vice President is 428,618,000.
All right.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
There are no members who have made reservations to interpolate the budget of the Office of the Vice President. Therefore, I move to submit the budget of the Office of the Vice President to the body for consideration.
Any objection? Hearing none. The budget of the Office of the Vice President in the amount of 428 million is submitted for the consideration of the body.
Mr. President, for the other executive offices, Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board and Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council, may I ask that Senator Legarda be recognized to present the budget?
Senator Legarda is recognized to present the budget of the Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board and the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council.
For the housing agencies, we have a total new appropriations of 14,748,338, Mr. President.
14 billion.
14,748,338.
There are a number of housing agencies in the agenda. Does that include all the housing agencies?
Yes, Mr. President.
The Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board,
The Housing and
the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council, the National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation.
Yes,
Does
and,
that
then
also,
and the National Housing Authority and the Social Housing Finance Corporation.
Yes, would the sponsor have a breakdown of the budget of these agencies?
Yes, Mr.
These are
President.
different agencies, please.
For the HLURB, it's 235,402,000. For the HUDCC, it is 134,063,000. For the National Home Mortgage, it is 1,464,109,000. For NHA, it is 12,635,748.
How much? 12 billion.
12,635,748. And for Social Housing Finance Corp, it's 279,016,000.
All
For a
right.
total of 14,748,338.
Thank you, Senator Legarda. Any question?
Mr.
Mr.
President,
Majority Leader.
There are none. No senators have made reservations to interpolate, and therefore, for the other executive offices, which includes the Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board and Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council, and budgetary support to government corporations, National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation, National Housing Authority, and Social Finance Corporation, I move that their budgets be deemed submitted for consideration.
Any objection? Hearing none, so submitted. One minute
May
suspension.
may I have a 1-minute suspension to prepare for the budget of the DSWD, Mr. President?
Suspended for 1 minute. The DSWD staff can come to the hall. Si Allen.
Name of barangay, location, or the location is yung barangay yung tayo sa Batangas. Yung number of people, gano'n.
The committee report affects kami. Wala ko yung hindi ko na dala yung report ko ako about the changes. But anyway, dito, naka-reflect mo yung amendments sa committee report. Yeah, okay, yung dito.
Lahat ng nagsayo yung area na walang tubig ang kuryente, may March installed na. Walang dahilan. Wala kasi ayaw nila. Ayaw ko yung energy, tawag na sa akin, or sa OP, whatever. Pangalawa, yung hindi pa nakakatayo, bakit meron pang ayun, sabihin na ninyo. Okay. Basta by March, lahat naman na itayo na walang utilities to utilities. Lahat hindi pa na ikatayo, nabid na at ikatayo na. Kasi yung including my project, na tayo lang din, kaya walang pumapansin. Tapos yung, tapos yung years na yun, 5 years na sila ng spot at katawan. Tapos ito, sandali, yung sa Kalawan, yung linikas ni Gina Lopez kung siya'y Pasig Riverhead at dinagay sa Kalawan, NHD ba yun? Tumawag si Senator Serge. Senator Serge. It's with the ABS Foundation. Siguro nakipag-usapan ni Secretary Gina when she was Pasig Riverhead. Hindi na yata walang kuryente. May iba na wala rin utilities at walang livelihood. So, ako pa ba maglalagay ng test na livelihood space training doon? Or kayo ba? Test na. Sa inyo. So, I have to put funding. Earmark na ito. Kayo na mag-usap sa test. Huwag na ako magdagdag kasi nagpapalagay ng 20 million. Eh, saan ko na mahanapin yun? Ang dami ng pondo ng test. Kayo na, you assure me, si Senator Serge kasi ito, former Senator Kalawan, Laguna, the Pasig resettled people, make sure may tubig, kuryente, livable, at may skills training, hiningi niya 12 million worth for all the relocations there. Kayo na mag-earmark, legislative so much. Hindi na ako mag-earmark. Yes. Okay, so commitment of March. Every year lang, the victim has a home or home is being built. Workable homes, suitable for human beings. Okay. Second, the Batangas settlers will have a home. Fourth, the Kalawan relocated may livelihood. Okay. Then, ito, kailangan you will put special provisions in the NHA budget from the Green Advocacy Group. Yung architects, i-connect mo na yung babae, magaling sila eh. Green of the United Arts Can you give the UAP is the umbrella, but the Green Advocacy Council. Si babae sa lalaki, nagpunta rito. Bigay mo yung dalawang number ngayon kay GM. Mag-usap sila. Lahat ng elemento ng green structures ay ilagay. Andun na rito. Integrate nyo.
Sa ano po, Tibulit.
Tibulik ha? Ito, Tibulik. Tibulik, yes. Ayun. Simple. May water catchment. Dapat. ayon sa will direction. Tapos may gulayan ng mga bahay kong gobyerno sa Board, Kinaklis Garden. Kasi ganun yung bahay ko. Yun yun. Ano pa?
Sa committee dito kay Presidente, 1,000 families every week transfer for 28,000.
Maluwag yung deadline ko yata ng Marso.
Tama yun.
Hindi kaya ng January.
Marso na, Marso.
January 28 kaya?
Marso na, Marso
Birthday ko
na.
January 28. Marso na.
Marso.
Napadulas ako. Marso ang maluwag eh.
Hindi, sabi ko, end of the year eh. Sabi mo, Marso.
End of this year?
Hindi, i-transfer ko lang sa 39,000. That was my commitment, 32,000. I will transfer the 30,000 in flight.
Napadulas ako. Maluwag yung Marso.
Tama na yun.
Hindi.
Kasi hindi pa nang tapos ang design.
May listahan ko ha.
Ng power in this is robot.
Sige. Okay, so connect those two. The show me naman, malapit lang, a sample, a model of a green, low-cost housing. A green, tapos lahat ng ating pinagwilipatan, ano natin ang puno? At hindi naman kailangan galing sa inyong pondo, dahil lagyan ng DNR. Yan. Lagyan ng puno para puno sa mundo. Kasi pag 20 square meters, mga dikit-dikit siya eh. Tapos, puno sa labas, tapos may gulay. Tapos may stand for, o tingin, ilagay natin sa special provision na hihingin mo from the UAP Green Group lahat ng elements ng green structures under NHA budget. Part of that, hey,
You know the size that you see in Senator? I acquired them for the green.
Yeah.
The plants talaga along the major streets, different minor streets.
hey.
Sige, Senator. Thank you very much.
Salamat.
Former councilor namin, Councilor Davao. Attorney Jan, ako yung city planning ng Davao.
Get the number.
Davao City. Former councilor, yung chief of staff natin ngayon sa industry. Dalawa lang kami, dinala niya.
Easy yung SGM number. Okay. Si Emily. Okay na.
Balik kami po yung makakabibigay sa amin ko. Pero kasi ang nag-usap ko namin doon nila
Usap na rin ni Rayon.
Meron kayo allocation.
Yes,
Okay. Patayin mo yun.
yes.
Si Emily.
Actually, we already signed the MOA with Mayor. Nag-usap kami the other weekend.
Okay. So, dami natin Emily, ha?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Senator, thank you lang po.
Sige, Senator, thank you very much for support. Thank you.
Sino yung mga figures, ganun? Kayo. Sige.
Akin na nga yun.
Hi, dear.
Di ba business name?
Mabilis lang naman ako. Pwede na.
Pabalikin yung housing. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Babalik daw ang housing. Yes, ma'am. Yes, WD na. The housing kasi dismissed them already eh. Kung papuntahin ko na lang sa office mo. Ha? They're still in the waiting room, 10 minutes ago. Sila na mo. Kasi parang yeah. Balik yung housing. Yung chicken.
Marami talagang natatanong sa amin sa interloader.
Sabi ko, suntan ko sa sayo. Susungitan ko na lang sila.
Mr. President, may we resume?
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move for reconsideration my earlier motion to approve and submit for consideration of the body the other executive offices under housing and the budgetary support to the National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation. Both groups, Mr. President, except the Office of the Vice President.
All right, there is a motion that, to reconsider the approval of the previous motion to consider as submitted consider as submitted the budget of the other executive offices in the amount of 14,748,000,000. Is there any objection? Hearing none, so reconsidered.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we ask then the housing community to be back and that the DSWD group wait for a while. We do this only because the minority leader was late for just 1 or 2 minutes. So just to serve notice, this is the first and last time we will be doing it. If you're not here during the time that we tackle a certain budget and the budget is passed, the next best step is that we just ask the particular department to talk to the Senate or to the senator in his office perhaps, and no longer to be back in the on the plenary, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Recto.
Yes, Mr. President, I was in the building at 9 o'clock, and my understanding is that we would have resumed consideration of the following departments by 9 a.m. Now, I was in my office room studying the different departments and agencies.
Precisely, Mr. President, that's the
Then
only
on my
reason
way
that we agreed to call it back, because Senator Rector was in the building.
Okay.
If he was out of the Senate, we would not have called it back.
Yes, thank you very much.
Duly noted. So
Just for the record, I was not late, Mr. President.
okay, duly noted. So we shall now proceed with the reconsideration has been granted, approved. Is the Senator Recto, I assume, wishes to avail of the period of interpellation? So Senator Recto is recognized. Do we have the housing agencies already back in the hall?
No, just ask the exact location. They're still here. Okay. They're here.
Well,
Mr. President, they're just re-entering the hall.
so can we ask again, can we have a 1-minute suspension with the permission of the chamber? Can we ask the DSWD staff to give way first to the housing agency people?
Have coffee in the lounge, please, for me. Pwede lang sila rin kayo sa handa ko coffee. Bago kayo yung mga matagal na sa she's sick at home. Ano lang, i-review niya lahat ng aking special provisions. Lahat ng special provisions, especially yung nag-originate sa akin as my actress. At yung binagdag ni Okosa by email the other day, kung hindi pa yun naka-adapt. So the 2016 special pro, additional. Kita ako ba sa office ko?
Okay, we're ready.
Ready? Ready?
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed. Senator Rector is once more recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to our majority leader, and thank you to the distinguished sponsor. I will not take too long on this issue, Mr. President, but I'm just very much concerned that, one, the budget of the housing agencies of government in 2016 was 32 billion pesos. In 2017, that dropped to 14.7 as proposed, for a drop of roughly, gano'n yung drop? 17, almost 18 billion pesos, Mr. President. Now, first question, Mr. President. Madam Sponsor, what is the housing backlog in the country?
The question is, what is the housing backlog in the country?
They're retrieving the figures, Mr. President.
Sorry?
I recall in my privilege speech last week, I mentioned about the lack of absorptive capacity of the National Housing Authority. They are retrieving now the numbers on the housing backlog. According to the housing agencies, DBM scrapped or reduced their budget because of their because of the funds still available for next year.
So therefore, with that response, Mr. President, the
asking
DBM
2011.
has been aware of the low utilization rate, I presume not only of the housing agencies, but the other departments of government. Now, in response yesterday by the DBM, they said to the questions propounded by Senator Escudero that they no longer intend to release the unobligated allotments in 2016. Is the distinguished sponsor saying here today that for housing, they will continue to release this in 2017?
Unobligated. Give me
Baka
your
hindi alam ng mga
2016
departments kasi yan eh,
unobligated of
Mr.
all
President.
agencies. I'm asking them for the 2016 unobligated, which could be the reason why DBM scrapped the 2017, not scrapped it totally, but reduced it because they still have 2016 continuing. So 1 minute suspension, Mr. President. Just give me
1 minute suspension.
26 billion, 25. Oh, okay.
Tapos, ang 20.7, ito yung balance. Ma'am, as kasama.
Oh, sabi nila, nagastos nila.
Na-obligate na.
Na-obligate na niyo yung 20 billion? Okay. The 25.6 is the, dito ka lang, Irene, is the 2016, right? And then, pero June 30, 20 billion pa kayo. Correct. But you've obligated all the 20 by now? Yes.
What's the-
Ah. The 14. For Yolanda. Okay. And that's probably the reason why they did not give you a bigger budget because may unreleased pa. Okay. Mr. President, ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, in 2016, they have a 25 billion budget for Yolanda. 11 billion has been obligated, and the balance of the 11 from the 25 earmarked for Yolanda is still unreleased by DBM, therefore unobligated, but is continuing for 2017, and they will utilize it for Yolanda in 2017, Mr. President.
Okay, that's fine with me. So what is not for Yolanda?
How much is your, hindi pang Yolanda? When I say? No, 2016.
So let's try to understand the data, Mr. President. The sponsor said the budget for the NHA in 2016 was roughly 30.5 billion. Okay? What was obligated was how much?
11?
11.
11. Of the 30 billion, how much was for Yolanda?
11 lahat Yolanda. Yes, no, just answer me. The 11 billion is all for Yolanda. Correct? Better be sure. They say that the 11 billion, Mr. President, is all for Yolanda.
Okay, and lahat yun na-release, pero hindi pa tapos.
Na-obligate na po.
Yeah, na-obligate.
Na-obligate na. Na-release, na-obligate.
Correct. How much was disbursed? Yung binayaran, disbursed.
Ilan na ang disbursed?
Because that will determine kung natapos yung project o hindi. O kung, yeah, correct. Kung nabayaran na yung contractor, halimbawa.
Maliit pa po. 230.
Oh, only 230 million of the 11 billion released and obligated of the 25
Has been
billion
disbursed.
has been disbursed.
Okay. What about the 19 billion?
Yung balance ng 25.
Kasi 30, 11 Yolanda, may natirang 19. That should be for non-Yolanda areas, right?
Yung balance, nasaan?
Yung 17
Oo.
Yolanda.
Unreleased, that's fine. What is it intended for?
For Yolanda,
Yolanda rin po.
Okay. Ano pa ang inyong?
2 billion na lang.
Yung 2 billion is for the
For the
teacher
other,
areas.
in Metro Manila, the ISFs in Metro.
Ah, okay. The unreleased will be released by DBM and
Will be released when?
Well, DBM is here when others possibly. Or we have already.
Kaya the request will release it.
I'm sorry?
Kung may request na po.
Oh, you've not requested. Why will you not request for it?
May request kami one.
Okay. The agencies are arguing whether they will request or not. Okay. So,
I know this is difficult for the sponsor. I don't want. I don't
no,
want to make
I'm
it difficult.
frustrated as you,
Yes.
even more.
Yes.
Because I was, during the hearing, these were the things I cited. And DBM, and let me just put it on record, all agencies must coordinate with each other. We do not like to hear DBM saying you have to request. And we don't like the agencies telling DBM we have requested. Please talk to each other. Otherwise, we'll suspend this.
So what is now the situation?
So, the situation is they have to agree whether the remaining funds
19 billion.
has been
Will be released. If it will be released,
17 billion, 17 muna for Yolanda, is waiting for release. And it should be released before the end of the year.
You mean-
obviously.
no.
Yes.
Let's go back. We said earlier 30 billion yung budget ng NHA. We said 11 was earmarked for Yolanda. 11 na release. Although hindi pa tapos yung project, more than 200 million pa lang ang nababayaran.
30.
So may natirang 19.
30 minus 11, 17 is for Yolanda, and 2 for those in
ISF si Metro.
internal settlers, informal settlers in Metro Manila. So 30, Mr. President.
Yes.
11.
Yolanda?
No, 11 already released and obligated,
Okay.
230 million of which has been disbursed.
Okay.
The balance of 19, 17 is awaiting release from DBM.
So wala pa?
For Yolanda, and 2 billion
Again
for
for Yolanda?
inform-
Again for Yolanda?
For Yolanda.
So
So that's-
11 plus 17 should be for Yolanda.
60,000.
28 billion.
So are you sure?
Yes, 60,000.
So 11 plus, so of the 30, only 2 billion is not Yolanda.
Yeah, that's ISF's of Metro Manila.
That's what they claim, Mr. President.
And 2 billion
The 2 billion of the 30
for Manila.
is for ISF for Metro Manila. Yes.
Informal settlers.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, now, let me point out.
Sigurado.
This is one of the most important programs of government. Okay? Based on the latest cabinet meetings of the President, they have approved the NEDA's Ambition 2040. Essentially, it talks about housing as a very important program of government. Okay, that by the year 2040, the idea is people will be able to afford to own their homes, among others. Kasama yan sa Ambition 2040.
2040,
Now,
yes, Mr. President.
I am surprised why there is a huge reduction in the housing budget. The total sector of housing, which is part of our infrastructure
Who can answer me?
program, has been reduced by more than 50%. Considering it is such a major program of government, and it has one of the highest multiplier effects in the economy. Now, having said that, may epekto to sa traffic sa Metro Manila. Halimbawa, may I know from the distinguished sponsor, ilan ba ang housing backlog natin?
Mr. President, just to answer the previous question.
Yes.
The 30 billion is an unusually high budget according to the NHA because of Yolanda. In short, in the past years, it's usually been 15 billion, and they reverted back to their usual budget because they still have unreleased, unobligated from the 30 billion unusually high budget.
Yes. No, I understand the point. Now, if you're saying that mahina yung absorptive capacity ng housing agency, kaya natin binabawasan, all the other departments, mahina ang absorptive capacity, as I
No,
pointed
what I'm
out
trying to say is
on
that
Tuesday.
apart from low absorptive capacity, the traditional budget is not 30B.
No, I
It's
understand.
usually
And
been
that's-
15.
And that is
Yes.
precisely the point. If the traditional is 15B, and you want to do a catch-up program,
You
the
have to
budget
increase
should
it.
not be traditional. That is the point I'm trying to drive on. What is the housing backlog of the
The
country?
total housing backlog. The total housing backlog or housing need is 5.5 million by the end of this year, or which would include, it includes already the ISFs, the 1.4 million. And of this 5.5 million who need homes, Mr. President, 1.4 million are ISFs, and approximately 40% of those are in Metro Manila.
Okay. So let's take a look at that data. How many homes are there in the country? How many houses are there ba? How many homes? Do we have that data? There are 22 million families. Right?
Public, when you say homes built by NHA?
No, no, no. I'm
or
just
private
saying,
and,
I'm just saying, does that mean that roughly 5.5 billion families, 1/4 of the entire population, walang bahay? Is that correct?
The figure of 5.5 million includes family families
living in one home, yes, or informal settlers,
then about 2 million are families who can most likely afford their own home in the private sector.
who can likely afford
In fact,
but don't have homes.
baka understated pa tong housing backlog eh. When did you do this survey that 5.56 million ang housing backlog? 2011? When was the last
When was
survey
this
that you
slide? When was
conducted?
this study done?
That was a 2010 census.
This was a 2010 census.
So it is a census of 2010 na 5.56 million yung backlog. By today, it must be much, much, much higher than that. I mentioned earlier that there are 22 million families.
Mr. President, of the 5.5 million who need homes, it does not necessarily mean that they're living on the streets. There are probably 2 or 3 families living on one roof.
I agree.
That's very Filipino. And maybe
I
those
agree.
also have homes, but maybe these are not suitable homes. So of this 5.5, it would have those in multiple family dwellings.
Correct.
It would be solo homes, but not
I agree.
sustainable, decent home. And the ISFs, 40% of whom are in Metro Manila.
I agree. I have no problem with that.
Okay.
But again, the fact remains, the last survey that was conducted for that was in 2010.
According to them, this is based on 2010.
We see the new one as of 2015.
Oh, wait, give me the new one.
Okay? Now, what I'm saying is if I take a look at the other surveys,
Yeah.
halimbawa, when we run for elections, we take a look at the Pulse Asia survey,
Yes.
we take a look at the SW survey.
you should give
I compare that with the national statistics, Philippine statistics surveys. It would appear that it is a much larger amount. That's one. Number two, I think we all will agree, malaki ang backlog sa house. Let's not fight about the numbers there. Pero malaki. You see it in the streets every day. You go out of this office, you go down
I
to
agree
Manila,
with you,
can
Mr.
see
President.
how many homeless people there are. And I think we all agree that housing is one of the biggest multiplier effects in the economy.
I agree.
If we are to create 2 million jobs a year, 12 million jobs in the next 6 years, housing should play an important component. In fact, in many industrialized countries, they look at statistics on ilan yung nag-apply for a housing unit. It is a leading economic indicator. Tayo, wala nga tayong ganyan sa Pilipinas eh. Okay, but having said that, of the 5.5 million backlog sa housing, at sigurado dito kung ang programa natin, poverty alleviation, sino pa ba yung pinakamahirap kung hindi yung walang bahay?
Totoo.
Wala ngang asset eh. Di ho ba? Okay. Now, of the 5.5 million, we are saying, based on government data, 1.5 million are informal settlers. Right? Okay. Of that 1.5, assuming that this is correct, and I'm saying it is more than this, ilan ang nasa Metro Manila?
40%
40%.
of the ISFs, yes, Mr.
Okay.
President.
40% are in Metro Manila.
Yes.
Now, how many of these, let me relate this to the traffic problem as well, and undergoing construction today. Ilan dito ang tatamaan ng, let's say, South Luzon Express Highway connected to the north?
You mean public land?
Oh, yung ginagawa ngayon na
Yes.
ano?
You mean
na-
housing projects that
No,
will
first
be
the highway.
expropriated
Correct?
because of the
Or dadaanan
because of
to
construction.
ng NLEX,
Maapektuhan ba ang mga
SLEX
NHA housing?
na dapat nakaplano na sa 2017, i-relocate to mga to para matapos yung project, maibsan yung traffic sa Metro Manila.
Will you be affected? And if your
Kung hindi natin i-relocate yan, hindi matatapos yung traffic sa Metro Manila. Even if we provide a budget to the DOTR,
into consideration. Yes.
yes.
Yeah, what you're trying to say, Mr. President, and rightly so, is with massive infrastructure spending and the South Luzon Expressway, which you said is being, yes.
Connecting to the north,
connecting,
to
correct.
bypass EDSA.
All the informal settlers living in that area will
Correct.
have to be relocated
Nadadaanan,
somewhere. And the
correct.
question is, how many are
Is there a
they?
plan? Yes,
Is there a
that-
plan? Yes, I'm anticipating your question,
Correct,
because
correct.
it's also my question. So,
Estimate 100,000.
100,000 individuals or families? Families will be affected by
By the rail,
the South Rail. Is that the South Rail? No.
No, the NLEX, SLEX pa lang unang tanong ko, ha? NLEX, SLEX, the one being done by San Miguel.
Yes, Mr. President. The resettlement component is always included in any infrastructure project, including the DOTR. And I have here actually the magnitude of ISFs affected by projects. Let's say if the project is Tutuban to Muntinlupa, number of families affected, 300. San Pedro to Los Baños, 9,340, etc. So there's a list of
Okay.
areas where there's infrastructure projects
And
and the number of families.
the total is what? 100,000?
100,000 families affected, Mr. President.
Okay. So, in your budget for next year ba, will you be able to relocate these 100,000 families? May sequencing ba yan? May program ba yan?
Hindi pa sila i-relocate.
hindi pa ma'am. Ang program
Yes. It's, I believe that this is a 5-year program. They said they're still confirming who among the settlers will be relocated or not.
bine-vet pa yan sa
They're still vetting it. So this will probably be incorporated in the 2018 so that they are certain. It will be included in their NEP of 2018 because they are not certain whether these projects will be pursued or not, or which areas will actually be affected.
No, that's precisely. I was very specific eh. One project lang muna. Etong NLEX, SLEX. Ilan yung tatamaan dyan? And are you prepared for that already? Kung hindi, madedelay yung project na yan.
we don't have a confirmed numbers yet because the figure will come from the DPWH. So they have not formally or officially provided.
The NLEX, SLEX project, Mr. President, that you are speaking about,
There are two,
will be,
There
yes.
are two NLEX,
So
SLEX
these projects are going to be, are being done by the DPWH,
Correct.
and they will communicate with the NHA insofar as informal settlers are concerned, according to them, to date.
So there is no communication
There is no
today.
communication yet.
And that's why you
That's
don't
why
know if
there's
you're
no
spending
budgetary
anything
provision.
in the budget for next year.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
None. To be truthfully, there's none. There's no communication about that project. There is no budgetary allocation for informal settlers.
So hindi nag-uusap-usap ang gobyerno.
Yun ang problema talaga, nakikita ko.
Okay. Magkano ang, how much are we losing sa traffic sa Metro Manila? You're losing about 900 billion a year in productivity.
That's true.
That is 6% of GDP. Meaning to say, if you grow by 7% today, you fix that problem, you can grow by 13.
Exactly. Yeah.
Huh?
So the reason,
Or at least 10. Pero kung hindi tayo nag-uusap, at simpleng-simple lang to. Communication.
parang
Okay, simple-simple lang to.
convergence, coordinate, talk.
Why are you waiting for DPWH? Why don't you send someone there to find out? You have to understand your client. Sino ba yung kliyente ninyo? ISF, di ba?
Mr. President,
Informal
there's a
settler.
subcommittee on infrastructure in the NHA.
It's
A multi-sectoral. You know, we love to create these subcommittees, council subcommittees at the NEDA level, but do they actually talk? We can see there's really a sore lack of communication and coordination. DBM, agency, infra agency, housing.
Okay. So, sige,
Ako
let's
naman
let's
sasalita
try
para
to be
sa'yo.
faster here. Sige. So how much was not spent in 2016 that will be carried over to 2017?
Yung unreleased at
Of what you expect?
This is 20, about 18
$19 billion, Mr. President, will be carried over in 2017.
So kung 17 billion, or how much is the budget for next year? NHA is just 12.6. The total for 2017 is, how much is the total?
For NHA, next year's budget, Mr. President, is 12.6,
Yeah, for the entire housing sector,
14.7.
14.7.
14.7.
Okay.
Sinagot ko na.
So madadagdagan yan ng, how much? 16? 19?
19 billion, Mr. President.
Dagdag. Oh,
Dagdag.
how many houses will be built sa tingin ninyo?
You just divide it by how many?
About 30,000.
30,000. Around 30,000 homes, Mr. President.
You
can be built.
expect to be able to build 30,000 homes next year?
To complete the community together.
Yes, but will you be able to build it? 30,000 homes? They said that they will be able to,
Okay,
it takes
so
1 year and a half to
assuming-
complete the community,
Yeah.
and they will be able to finish it.
Okay, so assuming hindi madagdagan yung backlog. Backlog pa lang to, ha? It will take 20 years to build all of this. Kung 6 million, 30,000, more or less. 20 years. Assuming hindi nadadagdagan. But the population will increase by 12 million between now until 2022. Kung 25% of them mahirap, may backlog na naman yan, di ba? Right? So, ano yung break-even nyo dyan? I mean, how many should you build? Assuming next year, 2 million new
Housing need
kids will be born.
5 million, but the ones only really need government intervention are the 1.4 million.
The 5.5 is still 20.
Ilan yung kailangan pabahay dyan?
Yun na po. This is 2010 census. We just got this last week.
It's still 5.5.
Yung housing need, yes. Pero bumaba na yung ano.
Oh, 5.5 pa rin, pareho.
Yes, but that includes kasi those who are answered by the private sector. The ones who really need government interventions are the informal sector.
But this is 2010 to 2015
Yes,
did not change.
projected po.
To
Mr.
make a
Pres-
dent on the backlog, how many should you be building ba in a year?
According to them, Mr. President, that the 5.5 in 2010 was a projected need. And according to them, based on their latest census, it's still 5.5. And the most urgent need would be for the informal settlers in Metro Manila, which is 1.4 million.
Correct.
So if we were to prioritize, itong 1.4 ang pinakamahalaga, di ba?
Correct. So 1.4, nadadagdagan yan.
Nadadagdagan.
You will build 30,000 lang next year.
The 1.4, just to clarify,
Yes,
the 1.4 is present need or a projection?
Projected until 2022.
It's projected until 2022. Hindi. I want a real need. Ngayon. Current need.
We're talking about backlog here, di ba?
We're talking about backlog.
And then,
It's not a projected
and then we have to
backlog.
do projections as
Yeah.
well,
One
para you
minute, para lang
know.
maliwanag tayo.
Oo.
The 1.4 million is a real need because it's a backlog. So, iba pa yung projected need sa 2022.
1 minute suspension.
Yes.
Currently po, Senator, figures now, 26.
Suspended.
Ito. Para maintindihan niyo. Backlog lang. Ano yung projected backlog? Let's not talk about projected. Okay, thank you. Ready to resume?
Resumed.
Mr. President, it's been clarified, my statement earlier is accurate. The urgent priority or the backlog is 1.4 million for the informal settlers, and that's what NHA needs to provide for housing.
And next year, you will build 30,000. Next year. How many did you build in 2016?
This year, what did you build?
40,000.
40,000 homes were built in
Doon sa 40,000,
2016.
ilan yung nakatira?
Right now, 5,000.
Of the 40,000, 5,000 are occupied? There's an approximate 40% occupancy of the 40,000 homes built in 2016.
Of the 40,000 homes built in 2016, I heard the gentleman say 5,000 lang yung occupied.
No, no, for Yolanda, but total
Okay.
40% of the 40,000 are occupied.
Okay, of the 40,000, ilan yung police, ilan yung sundalo?
The AFP PNP housing in 2015 is 3,434, and from January to May of 2016, 600. So 4,000. 4,000 for AFP PNP.
Ang nagawa.
Yes.
Ilan yung may taong nakatira?
Naku, hindi ko magbilang yung tao dyan.
Hindi, ilan yung occupied?
Oh, occupied ba lahat yun?
52,000 were awarded, 7,000 were occupied kasi yung iba malayo.
Hindi, pulis lang, pulis.
Sa APPNP housing mo program.
Hindi, 1,000 lang yun, parang yung 52,000 yan. Lahat na.
Sa cumulative total
Of all these years.
all these years.
Hmm.
So, 74, 52, 7 for PNP. So APPNP.
Let me share with you the data.
Here, there's actually...
74,000 units
Yes,
have
we have
been
it. I was going to read
contracted,
that.
57,000 completed, awarded 42,000, occupied
7,000.
4,600 lang. Based on the COA report.
In my records, Mr. President, occupied is 7,672
Out of?
out of awarded
Di
52,341.
ang baba. Still, di ba?
Baba, sobrang
There's
baba.
something terribly wrong.
There's something terribly wrong.
Terribly wrong. Ha? And now, hindi informal settler yan.
That's AFP and
That's
PNP.
AFP, PNP. What
Tinanong-
more kung
tin-
informal settler pa?
Tinanong ko yan kanina, bago kayo dumating. Sabi ko, dahil sa hearing, yun din ang pinakita sa
Kaya
akin.
tama, pinauwi mo na kaagad.
Ha?
Just kidding.
No,
Okay, anyway.
because in the hearing, I asked the same questions you're asking me. And the reason was, in the hearing and before this conversation, was the police and the military personnel were assigned in that area at the time. They were reassigned. So it's not an assignment home. It will be the retirement home. So it was awarded, they have not moved in until such time that they will retire there. So it was awarded, they're not giving it up.
That's
They have
what
their
they're
things
hoping.
there, but
That's
not
what they're
occupied.
hoping, that it will
Then
be
I asked them,
occupied.
may utilities ba? May tubig, kuryente? Yung iba meron, yung iba wala. Bakit wala? Dahil daw sa luwa at dahil sa LGU. O di makapag-usap kayong lahat. Si Presidente daw ay nagbigay na ng deadline sa lahat ng dapat ng stakeholders na dapat tumulong, luwa at saka LGU. And again, before you arrived, I gave them a deadline of March of 2016 na lahat ng nagawa ng 2017, nagawa ng bahay ay may tubig at kuryente at walang dahilan na ayaw ng LGU, ayaw ng luwa, kasya. March of 2016, maghihiring ako sa housing agencies oversight ng finance kung ano na ang nangyari sa naitayong bahay na hindi maokupa dahil walang utilities at wala pa yung mga tao. We will assess it as oversight function of the Finance Committee. And join me,
Okay.
please.
Yes, I will join you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I'm with the chairman here, no? And this is our opportunity to be able to review.
Yes.
And that's why I'm saying that importante yung rear view mirror provision in the budget. That they can come back to us and report to us what they accomplished. Na hindi na kailangan tanungin muna, hahanapin pa natin. They should make they should give us a report card of some sort
Yeah.
of what they've accomplished. So, there is a big problem in the housing agency, that's for sure, no? Okay, one final point na lang.
Bakit pa kasi?
Ano bang trabaho ng HLURB? Regulatory.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Walang HLURB dito. Umalis na. Yes.
Hindi, sa pagkaalam ninyo, anong trabaho? Regulatory. Hindi ba?
Planning, regulatory, and quasi-judicial. Yes.
Okay,
The
but-
HLURB, were they here earlier?
Correct, quasi-judicial.
Yes.
When you say planning, anong role nila sa planning?
What is this? All of this? All of this?
Senator, sa planning, they provide technical assistance on comprehensive land use plans.
Yes, the HLURB gives technical assistance for LGUs for their
Correct.
loops.
Land use plan.
Yeah, comprehensive land use plan.
Okay. But their
They-
bigger role really today is regulating the private sector,
Yes.
right? Okay. Then the HUDCC, coordinating council for all the
Coordinates all the
different
housing
1, 2,
agencies.
3,
Yes,
4,
the-
5 agencies,
Sila po
right?
yung HUDCC ang nagko-coordinate
So
sa
if we are
lahat
to
ng
create a
lima.
department, in effect, it is the HUDCC.
Yes.
Is that correct?
It's the HUDCC, which is the coordinating agency, and the HULURB, which does the planning. It will be merged to create the Department of Housing.
But the HLURB, by and large, is more regulatory than planning.
Both.
It can provide technical assistance to LGUs, but it's also regulatory because the LGUs go to them for regulation. Is that
Yes.
correct?
No, the HLURB regulates and assists LGUs as well as developers for their CLUPs, the comprehensive land use plans.
Correct.
And
But does the HLURB build anything? It does not.
no, it does not.
Oh,
It does not.
correct.
It
So
does
they're
not
not a
develop.
developer.
No, it assists or regulates,
Yeah, correct.
Yes.
Regulates. Okay. NHA
builds.
builds.
It's the production
only-
arm.
In effect, you are the production arm for those who cannot
Afford. For the lowest
in the private
30%.
sector.
Yes.
Di ba?
Yes.
So yung mahihirap lang talaga, yung hindi kaya magbayad,
Yes.
by and large. Pero sinisingil din ninyo yan, di ba? Okay? Na mababang interest, supposed to be. Okay? So NHA yan. Okay. National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation.
Yan ang secondary mortgage market. That's fund mobilization through the secondary
Understand.
mortgage market.
Okay. When you say National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation, what does it do?
Yan ang nagtutulong
It buys the receivables of our developers
it buys the receivables of the developers
and then sells them in the market.
and sells them in the market. Kaya nga secondary mortgage market.
Magkano yung total market?
Currently, nasa ano lang, I think it's around approximately 5 billion. Maliit pa lang.
How much?
Around 5 billion pa lang yung securitized.
No, sila 5 billion.
5 billion.
But what percent of the market are they really involved in? Minuscule. Pwedeng isa na to. What do they do?
Is
How much is the
NH
total
Are they here?
market sa housing?
But they were here earlier.
Oo.
Yes.
So, how much have they traded in the
How
market?
much
5
have they
billion?
traded?
About 5 billion now.
Around 5 billion, Mr.
O
President.
magkano ang real estate industry? How much is that? Trillion.
It's a very small.
So they have only traded a very small portion of the whole
Not
industry.
even 1/10 of 1% siguro.
The long-term goal is for them to reach 6% of total fixed income securities so that the housing agencies have to rely
Oo,
less
huwag
on
lang mahaba. We actually have pending bills on creating the Department of
Yes,
Housing. And your comment earlier on, pwede na isara ito, that can be assessed
Yes, yes, yes.
when we
No, I'm just
rationalize
trying
the
to
housing
understand
agencies.
To get the data on basically what is their participation in the
Yes.
market.
Yeah. Can we
Almost
submit?
negligible.
They were here earlier, but they
Oo.
had left. We'll
Malamang
also-
mas malaki pa utang nito eh. It's a drag on the, possibly. May contingent liability pa siguro to eh. Anyway, we'll get the financial statements. What about the Social Housing Finance Corporation?
Financing for socialized housing of formally organized internal informal settlers, the SHFC, Mr. President,
Okay. So financing to.
for the ISFs.
So they work together with the NHA?
Yes.
They work together with the NHA?
Pag private lands, SHAFC, pag government lands,
So ito yung community mortgage program.
private lands.
Is that correct? Community mortgage. And your budget for next year, the budget for this will be reduced by 3/4.
I understand, Mr. President, that the SHFC, the SHFC, are the ones that take care of the informal settlers, and they deal with private landowners and help the ISFs buy in private lands, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Is this an important program? Yes. Why is the budget cut by 3/4?
Wala nang CISPA funding. Maintenance na po yung CISPA. CISPA maubos na. Na-deplete na yung CISPA funding.
DBM has cited that the rationale behind the reduced funding to support CMP for 2017 is due to remaining balance of the CISFA funding. It should be noted that CMP is likewise the only shelter program for the poor and underprivileged of the national government.
Okay, so we cut it by 3/4. Okay. Well, I will no longer belabor the point, but thank you very much for the opportunity to the distinguished sponsor.
No,
and to
I'm grateful to you for bringing it and putting it in the record, because I agree totally with everything you've said. And just so that you know, before you arrived, we discussed this with NHA, and in fact, that's the reason why I gave them deadlines of March to make sure every house built is occupied and given utilities. And we will hold a hearing to see their accomplishment until then.
one final point siguro. Why is the budget of NHA under MOE? Hindi ba dapat capital outlay yan?
It's considered a subsidy.
Subsidy. Pag-subsidy of the government, of the national government.
MOE, but you can use it for capital outlay.
But we are using it for
Because it's a subsidy, because it's,
for ISF, for socialized.
because it's considered a subsidy from the national government, so it's an MOE. But that MOE, once transferred to them, can be used for capital outlay.
Okay, thank you very much for that
Yes.
clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I move that we submit for consideration the executive offices under the Office of the Vice President, together with the budgetary support to government corporations.
Any objection? Hearing none, the budget for the housing
Housing.
executive offices with the amount of 14,748,000,000 is submitted for consideration.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend the session and allow the Department of Social Welfare and Development to join us in the session hall.
Session is suspended.
Bicol sa Lambayo. Ay, pilit natin ang gawin nyo.
Oo, sige. Para tapos na ako.
Pero maya-maya pa yun, ha? Baka dinner time, before dinner, ha?
Dinibot ko na today.
ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, we now take up the budget of the Department of Social Welfare and Development. We ask that Senator Lon Legarda be recognized to present the budget.
Senator Legarda is recognized to present the budget of the Department of Social Welfare and Development. Senator Legarda.
Yes, Mr. President. The Department of Social Welfare and Development and the attached agencies have a total budget of 128,169,467, Mr. President.
May we ask that Senator Risa Ontiveros be recognized?
Senator Hontiveros is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Madam Sponsor. At the outset, Madam Sponsor, I'd like to express that I'm really glad that the leadership of the DSWD has finally recognized the importance of the conditional cash transfer program as a poverty containment measure. So my questions, Madam Sponsor, will focus on DSWD's sustained implementation of the CCT. First off, Mr. President, Madam Sponsor, how does the DSWD intend to operationalize the CCT? Will it be adopting the original conditionalities pertaining to education and health as they were first introduced and implemented?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. After the last round of assessment of the National Household Targeting Survey for Poverty Reduction, of the 4.4 million household beneficiaries of the Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program, there are 1,315,477 who have their status reclassified to near poor or transitioning families. And owing to this reclassification, these households shall no longer receive their 500 pesos a month health grant. Among the cash grants the beneficiaries are receiving, may I inquire, Madam Sponsor, on what basis has the health component been chosen to be dispensed with for households who are in transition? And could I note, Madam Sponsor, that an impact evaluation conducted by the Asian Development Bank showed that Pantawid families spend comparatively more on education and health. So with this question, Madam Sponsor, I'm asking the first of my three main themes about the CCT, which has to do with the criteria. How do we graduate for peace families from those enrolled to near poor or transitioning families?
First of all, Mr. President, with regards to transitioning households, they are those Pantawid Pamilya households whose level of well-being have improved but are still vulnerable to economic shocks. Therefore, they continue to be provided with education grants, health services through PhilHealth and other social protection programs like the Sustainable Livelihood Program or the SLP. Now, the modified CCT has the education grant of 300 pesos for daycare, kinder, elementary, 500 pesos for high school, the health grant of 500 pesos per month, and support services like cash for work, livelihood assistance, SLP, and house rental. The regular CCT, they have an education grant of 300 for daycare, kinder, elementary, 500 for high school, and health grant for 500 a month. The transitioning households also have the education grant, and the additional here are, the focus is on livelihood and employment, including skills training. Automatically, all CCT beneficiaries, whether transitioning or regular, avail of the PhilHealth benefits, Mr. President. And all CCT members, whether transitioning or regular, have the rice allowance to be given in cash grants. That is a difference in next year's CCT.
Yes, Madam Sponsor. So I'm still hoping to be enlightened on what basis the health component has chosen to be dispensed with for households who are in transition. But I do note the positive aspect of the Sustainable Livelihood Program, or SLP, which I will ask about further, because it is also a positive aspect in other conditional cash transfer programs in other countries, some of which our country also studied in crafting our own four-piece program. And I take note also of the mention Madam Sponsor made about the PhilHealth and about the rice allowance, and I will be asking a further question about DOH and PhilHealth
Let me clarify.
later. Yes,
I
Madam
understand
Sponsor.
your concern, like it is considered or included in the regular CCT, but transitioning would not have the health grant. And the reason and justification for that is that they are members of PhilHealth and can access the PhilHealth benefits. And especially with our intervention in the budget to include all poor Filipinos, whether enrolled or not, so they will be covered by PhilHealth. So we can be assured that the transitioning households who may not be, who are still poor by our standards, of course, but are not as poor, the poorest of the poor, will not have the health grant like the modified and the regular, but are PhilHealth members and can access at any state-owned hospital the point-of-care facilities.
Yes, Mr. President, I affirm and support what Madam Sponsor has said about the universal enrollment of all Filipinos, whether enrolled or not in the four-piece program in PhilHealth, through one of the most important features of the proposed budget for next year. And I'd like to ask further about DOH and PhilHealth in relation to my second theme of questions
Yes.
on the four-piece program, which is the conditions, the old and or new conditions attaching to the four-piece. And also my third theme, which would be the responsibilities of the institutions na sasalo dito sa mga original four-piece member families na nagta-transition upwards. According, Madam Sponsor, to the budget brief prepared by our own LBRMO, or Legislative Budget Research and Monitoring Office, transitioning households would still indeed enjoy the health services through the DOH and PhilHealth. May I know, Madam Sponsor, specifically what constitute these services and how these differ from or are similar to the health grant that the CCT beneficiaries originally received in cash?
500.
Health grant, but dito wala na nga pag-transition.
Wala
So,
na.
PhilHealth benefits, point of care.
Because it's also recognition na nag-progress nga yung
Yes, yes.
four-piece.
There is no new conditions, Mr. President. And as I mentioned earlier, the health grant of 500 pesos may not be given to the transitioning households, but their health care needs will be addressed by their membership in PhilHealth, automatic membership in PhilHealth. So, kung makaramdam sila ng anuman sakit, pumunta lang sa kanilang, kung pwede sa specialty hospital, pwede sa regional hospital, pwede naman sa provincial hospital, at hindi dapat sila'y itaboy dahil sila'y pangangalagaan maski transitioning na sila.
Thank you,
Wala lang yung
Mr.
500
President.
peso component na
Health
health grant.
grant.
Yes.
Yes, Madam Sponsor. My interest in this second theme about what new conditions or conditionalities will attach to the transitioning four-piece families also includes, in a way, thinking aloud, Mr. President, about could these conditionalities, for example, be related to a benefit package that PhilHealth has been planning to roll out for at least the past couple of years, the check-up, which is the outpatient benefit package, considering that right now,
Just check-up.
PhilHealth covers inpatient
Check-up.
packet services, only if the member is confined in hospital. Or for that matter, Madam Sponsor, bills that
transitioning
our Committee on Health is considering now on Bibong Bulilit, the first 1,000 days nutrition program for Filipino babies and children. Or even if these conditionalities of the four-piece families, including the transitioning families, might be pegged to the social development goals, sustainable development goals, which are cited also by our national government.
all of those that you mentioned have been considered, and checkups, I am informed, are covered by PhilHealth for the transitioning households. So it's not just point of care pag may maramdaman, pag may maaksidente, but even checkups, I am assured, will be covered for the transitioning households.
And of course, Madam Sponsor, Mr. President, we all recall what Health Secretary Pauline Ubial said under the DOH's Philippine Health Agenda, and especially their 5-year strategic plan, their plan to extend basic health services to the 20 million poorest Filipinos in the next 6 years. So, Madam Chair, moving on to another, Madam Sponsor, another question related to the conditionalities for transitioning families under the 4Ps. What is the DSWD's livelihood program for transitioning families? Will they be part of what the Madam Chair mentioned earlier, the Sustainable Livelihood Program, or SLP? And if they will, how many of the 1.3 million transitioning families will be absorbed by the program?
I'm a believer in providing capital assistance and tools for micro-enterprises and for livelihood, because everywhere we go around the country, people say, gusto namin may konting pagkakakitaan. So micro-entrepreneurship is very important. And so I am happy that the DSWD continues to support and hopefully expand the Sustainable Livelihood Program, which is a community-based capacity building program that seeks to improve the program's participants' socioeconomic status through the different modalities that it offers, such as skills training, seed capital fund, pre-employment assistance, and cash for building livelihood assets. It's implemented through the community-driven enterprise development approach, which vies for business sustainability and development in the context of the community's local livelihood assets and economy. The framework is guided with a resource-based and market-driven principle, highlighting the involvement of community members in identifying and managing livelihood opportunities that are linked to sustained markets. There are 2 tracks here. One is a micro-enterprise development, and one is employment facilitation. In the 2017 target, based on the NEP, they would target 378,822 households now who are eligible to avail of SLP. So they must be 18 years old, they must be a member of the 4Ps, and even non-Pantawid Pamilya families identified as poor based on the National Household Targeting System for Poverty Reduction, or listahan, or poor families with Certificate of Indigency from the LGU, or if they're identified as part of a vulnerable group. Sino ba ang vulnerable? Affected by disasters, differently abled, older persons, out-of-school youth. And of course, they must be willing to undergo social preparation and capacity building activities, and they must be willing to be organized into an SLP. Earlier, we were speaking with Secretary Tigabulong. All of this sounds great. These policies, these programs of how many billion? 10 billion for SLP? 9 billion. We have to make our programs accessible to the poor. Wag tayo maglalagay ng hadlang. Admin requirements, admin expenses, pinapabalik-balik. Na pupunta dyan sa sasabihin ng frontliner ng ahensya ng gobyerno. I'm not saying DSWD, wala kaming ganyan, walang pondo. Sabihin ko sa inyo kung anong probinsya, nag-testing ako dito, pinapunta ko sa probinsya yung kamag-anak ng aking isang staff, ang sagot, walang pondo, wala. So, ibig kong sabihin, sinasagot ko ng tanong nyo, kailangan natin gawin accessible itong mga programang to na ang gaganda natin dinedebate na tayo-tayo lang nakakaintindi. Pero sana talagang maramdaman natin. At we can test this. All your friends, leaders, people you meet when we go around the country, gusto namin kabuhayan. I meet people who do bonsai as a micro-enterprise in a sitio, not even a barangay. I go to a remote barangay in Antique where they do pottery from clay. Wala silang puhunan, kundi yung lupa at ang kamay nila. Mga kababaihan sa isang barangay sa Tibiao, Antique. Yung isa gumagawa ng kakanin. Lahat sila Ang gusto lang nila magkaroon ng 10,000 kapital o makabili ng kaldero o bumili ng basic tools. So, I enumerate all the programs of government. DTI SSF, DTI Roving Academy, Dole Kabuhayan, SLPF. They just stare at me. They do not know that these programs of government on microenterprise development exists. So, we've failed in our jobs as legislators, as leaders and representatives of our people who fund this, and I therefore enjoin all of the agencies of government to reach out and to explain. We need to simplify government processes, cut down on the bureaucratic red tape to make the poorest of the poor avail of the much-needed assistance through funds allocated by Congress, and to be more communicative in simple language and to abbreviate the proceedings so that they can avail of it. I hope that addresses your concern.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Sponsor, and I appreciate na gusto natin yung ganitong mga magagandang polisiya, magandang programa, and at the same time, I take heart that they are actually operationalizable based on our own previous experiences and also, again, studying the experiences of other countries na nagdisenyo, nagpatupad ng sarili nilang mga CCTs or conditional cash transfers. And for me, this discussion sa budget natin sa DSWD, sa 4Ps, importante kasi it also helps us shift the question from cash transfer, poverty alleviation at the first level to income security. Kasi economically ine-empower yung mga pamilyang Pilipino na sa ngayon ay enrolled pa, and lalo na yung mga transitioning upward. So moving forward, Madam Sponsor, of the targeted 381,000, did I get the number right, 978 families for the SLP, how many belong to transitioning families, or are they all the same transitioning families?
Lahat transitioning.
Lahat po.
All transitioning. But why do
Thank
you
you,
only give
Madam
transitioning? Why not
Sponsor.
all CCTs?
20% transitioning, 20% not transitioning or non-contable. Because there are other
80% are transitioning. I stand corrected.
Okay po.
80% of the 381 availing of the SLP are transitioning, and 20% are non-4Ps but are poor.
From the other sources, Madam Sponsor,
Yes,
that you
from the
mentioned
others that
earlier,
I
like
mentioned.
certification of LGUs, of
Yes.
indigency, etc. Okay, thank you, Madam Sponsor. And then, given that, in a way, back to an overview of the 4Ps, and then again, looking forward, how the program will be implemented, well, starting next year, but forward into the next 6 years. Given that the program has not yet reached its 2016 target by almost 70%. So there's about 1/3 of the 4Ps families that are transitioning, but there are about 2/3 that are not yet. And its budget, the 4Ps budget, has been cut by 200 million pesos. How does DSWD plan to absorb these transitioning families? Okay, now I stand corrected, Madam Sponsor.
there was no-
Only the SLP budget has been reduced by 200 million pesos for next fiscal year.
There was no cut.
No
there
cut, Madam
There was
Sponsor.
no cut on the. I'll just clarify.
The BUB was cut.
BUB.
That's the difference. The BUB has been stricken out.
It's the BUB in the DSWD budget that was cut. But this will not impact, according to Secretary, on the poverty alleviation programs of DSWD.
Social protection program.
Social protection, okay. Yes.
Okay,
Social
well, of course,
protection.
Madam Sponsor, BUB is a totally different program from 4Ps, although both under the ambit of the DSWD. So I'll just check back on that because they're both, in my view, they're both important social protection programs. Okay.
Let me
Um,
also
yes, Madam
say that
Sponsor.
all these DSWD programs are available for transitioning families, not just the SLP, but there's assistance to individuals in crisis situations, There's the Kalahi Seeds, which has been there since the Arroyo administration. And there is a convergence strategy in the SWD and with other agencies of government, I would assume. Not just Kalahi Seeds and crisis situations and SLP, but hopefully also, let's say, with TESDA, Dole Tupa, Dole DTI, SSF, and Dole Kabuhayan. And you can even coordinate with DOST in their set up. DOST has a set up program. You can even coordinate with the DNR, yes, and the DA.
Madam Sponsor, just validating my source for the figures I cited earlier. In fact, I cite them from LBRMO's briefing papers
Yes.
on the DSWD budget. There's a table here on the Sustainable Livelihood Program that the allotment for 2016 was 9.4 billion and the proposed allotment for 2017 is 9.2 billion. Hence my question about the reduction by 200 million
From
for SLP
2016
stands. From 2016 to,
to 2017.
the proposed, 2017.
from 2016. So it's not actually cut, it's a different figure. You're not referring to a cut from net to
No, no.
House or House to
A
Senate?
reduction from the previous years or the current year's allotment to our proposed for
2016
next
is
year.
9.6 and 9.2. And is that due to the BUB?
No, it's under the SLP table, Madam Sponsor.
Yes. Okay. So there is no cut. It's just a transfer of the Sustainable Livelihood Program of the BUB to the LGSF. It was transferred to the Local Government Support Fund. Is that correct? Yes. Just like the PhilHealth budget was transferred from DOH, tas solo ang PhilHealth. So people think nabawasan ng DOH pero actually linipat lang.
Okay.
So ito, it was transferred from
SLP.
the BUB of SLP to LGSF. Correct? No, but there is a decrease in micro-enterprise development. So part of the difference of 2016 and 2017 was a transfer to LGSF. But there really has been a decrease of 412 in the micro-enterprise development from 2016 to 2017, if you are to compare the budget.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. Moving forward to my last set of questions about precisely moving forward with the 4 Ps. Well, I asked earlier, how does the DSWD plan to absorb these transitioning families? And also, how does the DSWD plan to, if it does, enroll other families still classified as poor in the country and eventually transition all of them, transition all of our poor families through this social protection program out of poverty? And I ask this, Madam Chair, in the context also of the very interesting experiences of other developing countries' conditional cash transfer programs. For example, earlier we were talking about the Sustainable Livelihood Program. Brazil, whose own La Bolsa Familia was one of the models we studied in crafting our Pantawid, they too have, maybe it's a counterpart of our SLP, they have what they call a next step program through which they insert possibly what they call, what they also consider transitioning families into job industries in the areas of civil construction, tourism, etc. Of course, this is in the Brazilian context, but they do have this, what they call integration with productive inclusion programs. Their next step program is also called Plan SEC, or Sectoral Plan for Professional Qualification of Bolsa Familia program beneficiaries. Even in terms of the time frame, Madam Sponsor, it's interesting because La Bolsa Familia started in 2003, and then they introduced this next step program by 2008, 5 years down the road, almost similar to our own experience of 5 years now of the 4 Ps. then identification of transitioning families, and then entering them or enrolling them, as it were, in a sustainable livelihood program. And perhaps as it was for Brazil, maybe here also in the Philippines, this is where yung mga institusyon na sasalo sa original na
Yes.
responsibilities ng DSWD will come in. We might be talking of TESDA, DTI, some of the agencies that Madam Sponsor was speaking about earlier.
Yes.
And lastly, about this, so if we presume, Mr. President, Madam Sponsor, that beyond the currently enrolled and transitioning four-piece families, if there are still about 12 million or so poor families, so does this mean we will have just 3 batches more of about 4.4 million families each, 3 batches more of 5 years each initial enrollment in the four-piece, after which we expect that there will be at least 1/3 of them
Yes.
transitioning?
Okay.
What will be our next step intervention, both for the transitioning families and the average 70% or so who will not transition out of their batch after 5 years? And last, Madam Chair, sorry, it's Madam Sponsor.
No,
it's
it's
a long
very
question, but
interesting. Yes,
for me,
proceed.
yes, I'm glad that I think all of us in the room would share this interest. If we think about 3 batches of 5 years each, 15 years more or less, that's well within the SDGs time frame. That's also even more well within the ambition natin time frame. Because about 15 years from now, 2030, okay, SDGs, but ambition natin goes all the way up to 2040. So, what are the plans perhaps or the initial thoughts of DSWD, how to craft the programs and therefore
Yes.
the spending for these year on year till 2022 for the four-piece families?
Very good. May I respond to that very interesting question? First, of the 4.4 million members of 4Ps, 1.3 million are transitioning.
Yes.
The DSWD first, being new, the secretary and her group have to validate the 4.4 million, which would include the 1.3 million transitioning. Once they validate it, monitored, in as much as they want to increase the 4.4 million to include more poor families, because one social worker handles 500 up to 800 4P beneficiaries, it is physically impossible unless we increase our social workers. Why not? So that we can increase the beneficiaries of 4P. So once they've evaluated and once we see that, yes, there's still a need for more poor to come into the program and they're able to hire and train and build capacity of more social workers, then we can increase our 4.4. Now, we go to the 1.3. Are they really transitioning? Once they've been validated, monitored to be transitioning, then we provide them with all the livelihood programs I mentioned. And convergence is so important. DTI, as I mentioned, SSF, roving. DOST, step up. The DOLE, TUPAD, and Kabuhayan, and the other agencies of government. So there is a partnership against hunger and poverty, a framework which would include the Department of Agrarian Reform for Agrarian Reform beneficiaries, the DSWD, and the DA. It builds on the success of the Brazilian government's program, which you mentioned, on the Zero Hunger Plan and the Food Purchase Program. As you know, in Brazil, the provision of agricultural extension services is linked to the nutritional needs of the feeding program and logistics management related to production, delivery, and storage of required food items. So the PHP assistance is related to credit and insurance provisions, pricing issues, etc. So we should also include here, I did not see it here, but may I suggest, since I'm the author of the law that originated it with former Senate President Ople in '98, and Senator Angara revised the law, amended it, the peso law. Because the Public Employment Service Officer, which is found supposedly in every city and municipality and province, is supposed to do job matching. So apart from the micro-enterprise development component of the SLP, if the person who has transitioned wants to be employed and there is a need in the barangay, in the municipality, perhaps we can bring in the peso officer of DOLE into this convergence program. And so I hope that addresses the concern of Senator Risa on what to do with the transitioning families. So 4-piece expansion on hold until monitoring evaluation, until we have more social workers. 1.3 million validated, give them all the livelihood programs, micro-enterprise development, and self-employment. Let's also allow them to access funds from the Small Business Corporation. I see Senator Bam, who's an advocate of MSMEs. We should capacitate and let them access funds from MSME bank, rural banks, and the SB Corporation should be able to lend, or maybe they lend to rural banks who lend to micro enterprises. What are the other sources of credit for the poorest of the poor who have transitioned? Let's find out where they can. And I know that the DOST has a zero interest loan portfolio also for micro enterprises. They have loans and they have grants. So it's not here in your convergence. Let's include that. DOLE, peso, and DOST set or step up. And they have a loan portfolio and they have a zero interest. They have a zero interest loan and a grant. Yan. So hopefully, with all these programs of government, and because the Secretary believes in convergence, I hope these transitioning families will successfully emerge from the poor sector of our society.
Thank you, Mr. President and Madam Sponsor.
Yes.
I look forward to us as Congress partnering with the department in formulating and applying the best criteria to continue transitioning families out of poverty and including more qualified families in such a social protection program until
Yes.
such time that it will achieve its goals for all of these families. And perhaps the Madam Sponsor is also referring to like another wave of the validation of the NHTS. I also look forward to us assisting again through our oversight function, through any constructive inputs we may make to the department on conditionalities, drawing from different inspirations, national and international, legislative and executive, in order to enable the 4-piece families to make optimal use or to make optimal gain of this social protection program in their move towards from poverty alleviation and social protection to income security. And lastly, Madam Sponsor, I look forward to us continuing to also in partnership with the other institutions, yung pong sasalo sa pag-partner sa mga 4-piece families, lalo na habang o pagkatapos nila mag-transition out of poverty, and really assisting them on the road to economic empowerment. So thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you very much, Madam Sponsor.
Thank you, Senator Risa. I always welcome your wisdom, your interpellations. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
May we recognize Senator Laila De Lima, Mr. President.
Senator De Lima is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Madam Sponsor. Good morning to the members of the family of the DSWD.
Oh, no, Vice Chair yan.
I'll just be touching on a few points. First, It is often argued by legislators that the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Law, or otherwise known as the Pangilinan Law, as amended by Republic Act number 10630, is anti-discipline. Often they would say that it encourages young people to violate the law, and it even supports criminals who utilize children in the commission of offenses, knowing the latter do not incur criminal liability. So their oft-repeated proposal is to lower the age of criminal responsibility from the current 15 years of age to something lower, 13, 11, and even as low as 9 years old. So and it's no secret that the president himself and his allies in both houses of Congress are advocating for the lowering of the age of criminal responsibility. So my first question, Madam Sponsor, is what is the institutional position of the DSWD on the resurgence again of the calls for lowering of the age of the criminal responsibility?
Mr. President, I first would like to agree with the DSWD in opposing lowering the minimum age of criminal responsibility. It should be retained at above 15 years old. And upon consultation with their social workers and with child rights advocates, the following were identified as key reasons why the minimum criminal age of responsibility should not be lowered and must be retained above 15 years old. And if I might quote, the proposal to lower the MACR to 9 years fails to consider scientific proof on children's brain development. Empirical evidence shows that the human brain continues to develop until the age of 21 years. Despite their adult appearance, teenagers' brains are not yet fully developed. The prefrontal cortex, should I just read the whole thing, is developed last. What we're saying is that, yes, there could be the propensity to engage in risky behavior at that time, and the brain is not yet fully developed. It is not advised to subject a young children to a criminal process like adults. And lowering the age to 9 years is inconsistent with the Philippine government's obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child that requires that state parties should seek to promote the establishment of laws, procedures. I could go on and read this whole
No need, Madam
memo.
Sponsor.
Yes.
I laud the position of the DSWD on this very contentious issue. And I perfectly agree with the arguments raised by the DSWD as an institution against that proposal to lower the MACR. Now, the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Council, or the JJWC, given this institutional, very clear and encouraging institutional position of the DSWD, has JJWC undertaken initiatives to, for example, hold dialogues with policymakers who either do not understand or misunderstand the objective of the law, why the MACR is pegged at 15 years of age? In other words, are there initiatives on the part of the JJWC to educate our duty bearers so that they stop calling for such a move?
Yes, Mr. President. In fact, the Secretary has written a memo to the President. They had also appeared in the House hearing on this proposed measure, Mr. President. And just to make it clear, the President is open-minded, and the Secretary has aired her views. And what is your Bisaya word?
Gikan sa masa.
Gikan sa masa, meaning from the people to the people. Oh,
So
yun.
here, the people
So
we talked with were saying, no, don't lower it.
They consulted, so they're consultative. They consulted child rights advocates, social workers, people in the field.
So is that the reason why we seem to have not heard any more from the president about that proposal?
No, we don't want to grab credit for that. The secretary says no, it may not be solely due to her views, but what she's saying is that as a member of the cabinet, she consults with people and brings the people's views to the president. And he listens.
Still the president who will decide.
It's still the president who will decide. But
And I
that is-
appreciate the efforts of
that is
the secretary.
her personal view. That is the view of most of them in the institution. This is the view of the sponsor. And once it is here on the floor, I will oppose that measure.
Now, has JJWC undertaken also initiatives to conduct studies or look into the extent of the implementation of the Pangilinan law?
That's what,
Is there an assessment as to
still the September
how much protection CICLs are really getting from the faithful implementation of the law?
study.
Has there been a study
Yes.
showing empirical data, actual experiences, actual cases where it would seem that the law is not really being implemented properly on the ground? And if there is such a data, if there is such a finding, I suppose part of the study would be what are the root causes or what are the reasons for the non-implementation?
We did a universal study.
Yes, they did a universal study on diversion and its implications. And the council also conducted last September 15, a meeting and a forum, a legislative forum to orient lower house on the impact of this measure. And they included NGOs, CSOs.
Can the DSWD please share with us that study?
Yes, yes.
We'll appreciate it.
And we should also share this with you. This whole memo, which is very interesting, we could share this. All the reasons why it should not be lowered. Just to summarize, it should not be seen to help reduce crime rates since adults commit around 98% of crimes, and lowering MACR, putting in children in jail, will not address the issue of criminal syndicates using children. It is anti-poor. It will not teach children responsibility, but will only harm them. And it will require bigger resources among LGUs. There are many reasons, and this memo could be shared with the Senator.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. Now, the JJWC, also under the Pangilinan law, mandates the establishment of this mechanism called Bahay Pag-asa in each province and highly urbanized city. And it is supposed to provide interventions to reform CICLs. Yes, it is supposed to be funded and managed by LGUs, but I'd like to hear from JJWC as the lead agency with statutory mandate to ensure the implementation of the law if this Bahay Pag-asa are in place in every province and highly urbanized city as mandated under that law, because it's been years after the law was enacted.
35
Yes, there are 35 Bahay Pag-asa all over the country, Mr. President.
out of 80.
So that does not yet correspond to the Bahay Pag-asa per province and per highly urbanized city. What has been done with the non-compliant LGUs?
Mr. President, having been in this chamber for 3 terms, we see that not all laws are followed all of the time, and there's billions and billions of pesos of unfunded laws. And so, if this law is not followed insofar as the creation of Bahay Pag-asas in every LGU, if you are to look at other non-implementation and non-funding of laws, you will feel frustrated.
Can we consider in our preparations for our budget, maybe not necessarily for next year, but in succeeding years, that we also try to focus in funding this important initiatives. And as JJWC is the lead agency, it is strongly
Yes.
suggested that it examines and perhaps proposes mechanisms to hold accountable non-compliant LGUs.
We take note of that, and perhaps in the preparation of their NEP of 2018, they can include that. And instead of lowering the age, there are mechanisms to improve the law, and that would be the hiring of social workers and psychologists in local governments, and for LGUs to develop and to implement comprehensive juvenile intervention groups focused on prevention.
And those logistical requirements need to be incorporated in the JJWC budget, not yet included in the proposed budget, in the GAB, because
The capital outlay.
I note that the budget for JJWC is 85.5. So would that cover already those activities mentioned?
Mr. President, the capital outlay for the establishment of Pag-asa houses in compliance with the law can be done in 2018. However, the activities or interventions I mentioned don't have to wait till tomorrow. In fact, they should have been done from the time
Yes.
the law was enacted, because these are bringing in psychologists, capacity building, prevention, intervention. All of these can be done with LGUs and the social worker assigned in that area.
And that is supposed to have been factored in already in the budget. Is it? I just want, Madam Sponsor, I just want to make sure that, because these activities are really very worthwhile
Psychosocial
and
activities. Yes.
needed. But the problem is, have the concerned unit of the DSWD really took into consideration those proposed or intended activities?
I believe that we need to take care of our children and teen-aged citizens better. We need to see more proactive inclusivity of really caring for them, taking into consideration their psychosocial needs and mental health, psychosocial needs, so that we prevent them from falling prey to criminal syndicates. And I don't think this is a budgetary consideration. This is really part of our duty as citizens of our country. And I would like to think that other agencies like Mama Masid of DILG, Masa Masid, can converge with DSWD to prevent crime in the anti-drug war campaign. A program to take care of our children and teen-aged kids can be done for psychosocial interventions.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. Now, on a few items in the GAB. First is on the assistance to victims of disasters and natural calamities. Indicated here are amounts corresponding to the allocations for the NCR and the central office. And I note that the allocation for the central office under that item, assistance to victims of disasters and natural calamities, is 1.3 billion. Now, I know that the bulk of the budget for next year, insofar as calamities, natural disasters are concerned, have really been transferred to NDRIM. But of course, all these years, or the past years, DSW is supposed to be at the forefront, is the forefront lead agency in rendering assistance to victims of disasters and natural calamities. My first question, Madam Sponsor, is that this 1,389,203,000 allocation to central office under that item, assistance to victims of disasters and natural calamities, I would assume that this is much lesser than the budgetary allocations under the same item compared to previous years, like, for example, the preceding year, 2016. Is that correct, Madam Sponsor? because this is one of the things that I find rather, I'm not sure if I totally agree that we would be slushing a very significant portion of this amount from DSWD, simply because the whole governmental task insofar as calamities and disasters are concerned have been recognized to be with NDRMC. I don't think also DSWD as an institution wanted that.
Linipat lang. There's no reduction, and I made sure there's no reduction. It's just that the one fund concept of Secretary Jokno, it's still in the end dream, and an amount is earmarked for agencies who are allowed to have QRF, and it can be drawn anytime that the SWD needs it.
So if there is such a portion in the NDREAM fund under QRF supposed to be allocated also, or meant to be allocated to DSWD in due time, what is this for? The 1.3 billion, which appears to be lump sum,
This is for-
allocated to central office.
Yes.
I just want to
This is-
understand.
This is for cash for work in areas which are vulnerable. For example, Typhoon Lawin in Isabela, in the Cordilleras. People need funding assistance right away. So cash for work will be given. And this 1.3 could be broken down into welfare goods expenses, traveling expenses for the SWD staff, admin support, and the MOE would be cash for work in disaster-prone areas that have been hit by calamities.
So
natural
understandably, there could not be any regional or local allocations at this point
We cannot-
for this particular item, because again, this is supposed to be assistance to victims of disasters, wherever those victims would be when the natural calamity
Yes,
occurs. So moving on, Madam Sponsor, the next item right after that talks about protective services for individuals and families in difficult circumstances. And again, I see this is page, ano page ito?
Give me the cue card.
May page ba ito?
Sabi yung question, wala pang tanong eh. Ito na. Ito, to.
Page 260, volume. Page 260 of the GAB. It's either volume 1A or 1B, line 41. Protective services for individuals and families in difficult circumstances. So there are again lump sum allocations here for NCR and also for central office. I also would want just to understand why it is not possible at this point to show or come up with local or regional allocations.
We have a breakdown already. Actually,
There's a breakdown.
yeah, this is the one.
There's a breakdown, Mr. President, of the protective services by region. It's actually here. And this, by kind of protective services and by region. Educational, medical, transport, burial, food assistance, and non-food. So I have here from central office to and all the regions. And this is not a lump sum, Mr. President. It is identified here.
For the benefit of the uninitiated, what exactly are protective services for individuals and families in difficult circumstances? What are families, individuals, in difficult circumstances as compared to those in areas struck by natural calamities and disasters?
Yes, Mr. President, protective services would not be necessarily the victims of calamities. This is a broader picture of those in need of burial assistance, of those in need of educational assistance, of those in need of medical assistance, of those in need of food assistance and other non-food and transportation. You know, I'm sure when you go out of this hall, someone can go near you and say, pamasahe lang po pauwi sa Bicol. Kung tatanungin natin, paano kayo nakarating dito? Hihingi kayong pamasahe pauwi. So, imbis po na tayo ang magpaluwal at magbigay sa kanila, meron namang programa ang DSWD. Imumungkahi ko, balik probinsya na programa. Sana nga, Mr. President, ay meron na lang nakapirmi ditong DSWD para lahat i-direct na lang namin. Hindi, totoo. Totoo. Yun ang gusto ni Senator Lacson, tama naman. Sa baba, may building doon, may branch kayo dito, para wag na mag-download sa amin. Tapos yung admin staff pa namin, isa-isa endorsement letter, pupunta na naman, kawawa rin naman yung taong nagbiyahe dito para lang makita si Senator De Lima, uuwi rin naman ng Bicol. Magtayo na kayo ng inyong tanggapan dyan.
Sama sa budget.
Isama sa budget, yes. No, really. Desk.
Every one of
Hindi
us,
naman kay-
every 20,
Okay,
all
di-
24 senators actually
Hindi naman
experience
po
that.
kailangan ng opisina, desk lang nga, sabi ni Senator Lacson. Para yung hihingi ng micro-enterprise development, SLP, ayan. Yung magpapalibing, ayan. Yung kailangan ng transportation, ayan. Hindi na hihingin si Senator Villar ng pabahay. O sige, yung head ng accounts ng Senado, si Senator Lacson, ay tumutungo. Sige, we will assign the head of accounts to coordinate. Ha? Tumatungo. Oh, ano man yun, is nodding. Okay. And the Senate President will agree that may accounts naman kayo dyan to set up a decent office for DSWD, a desk, and you will not discriminate kung majority or minority ang senator. That's just help the people, regardless of who they approach.
Okay
So they
na,
don't
okay
have
po
to
yan.
line up in our offices. So we owe it to the interventions of Senator De Lima that this desk will be created. Desks.
Okay na okay po yan. Kailangan lang natin medyo i-define ng husto, ng klarado, yung in difficult circumstances, because this is such a very generic term. Difficult
Lahat naman in
circumstances.
difficult eh.
Everybody can claim. Anyone who would seek assistance can always claim that
Alam
they
naman
are
ho
in
natin
difficult
siguro.
circumstances.
Yes. There are requirements.
Meron ho ba tayong pwedeng
Okay, not everybody will answer together, okay? So, very clearly, we know who are indigent. We know who are in need, and there's a social worker who assesses the applicant for this program of protective services. I will repeat, educational, hindi naman basta bibigyan ng 10,000, papakita ka ng may taong naka-enroll, hindi makapagbayad, i-assess naman yan. Medical, magpapakita ng reseta, humihingi ng gamot, or dapat i-confine sa ospital. Transportasyon, hindi ko lang kung papatunay, paano ka nakarating dito, paano ka makakabalik. O, food and non-food. So we can give you these details, yan.
kung ganun ho ka-generic yung pag-aano natin ng difficult circumstances, sa tingin ko po, itong allocation na to, kulang to.
Oh, yun. So, I will agree to your...
Pwede ho ba kayong magpadagdag? Pwede ho ba kayong...
Pwede. Magkano ba ang total?
Magkano ba ang pwede? So per the GAB, anong volume ito uli? It's on page 260.
Kaya na magtayo sila ng opisina dito.
1A or 1B, hindi pa sigurado. Line 41. Ko.
5 billion plus. Ito na.
Dapat may social worker dedicated sila. Correct. It's a political office.
3.5 na yan ang breakdown.
Sample na. Kulang to.
1 minute suspension.
Yes, suspension. Sige na.
Satellite office.
Yun na, desk na. NCR.
Basta may opisina.
Naku, baka magkaroon na dyan ng haba ng pinggan. Alam nila may opisina dito.
Kasi nga kami nandun kami sa tabi ng HOR. Nire-refer yung sa amin.
Yun nga. Sir, play satellite dito. Ayan, sige. Very good, very good.
Bigyan mo kami ng space.
di ba?
So sa records,
Just give Senator De Lima, ready to resume. Just give Senator De Lima the regional allocation and provincial kung gusto nyo. Oo, hindi langsam yan. Hindi papayag yung secretary. Si secretary pa, papayag ka ng langsam.
kasi yung iba pong item, I'm sorry, di pa, wala pa pala.
Wala pa si Senate Chair.
Upo po, ikaw na upo. Yes, sige. O, last na yan, ha? Sige, 12:30, ha? Sa mga sarang tindahan. Sige. May satellite office na dyan. Sige. Recorded. Pero hindi yan dagdag sa budget. Ang earmark ninyo.
Pero we need a space. I-provide us a space. I-aircon yung
Mr. Lacson ang in charge ko. Space, ang ganda ng aircon lang. May CR, may computer.
One B. Saan?
may dala-dala ko dito.
Isang point na lang. One last question.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Well, maraming staff dito.
Mr. President, it's been decided that the Senate will allocate a desk as a satellite office of the DSWD for the Protective Services Program with no need for augmentation of their budget. They will earmark it from their present program because the HOR does it and refers all since they are neighbors in Quezon City. And so all of those coming to our respective offices will be sent to the DSWD Protective Services Desk, which Senator Lacson is assigned to do as chairman of the accounts. It will be a decent air-conditioned room with computers, CCTV, and an admin staff of the Senate will join the DSWD.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
There
you.
is a public assistance center there,
Yes,
which can fit into this
sure.
administrative work.
You're correct. The
requirement.
Public Assistance Center will now be the satellite office of the DSWD, and no allocation from the Senate will, or senators' personal expenses, but it will be DSWD satellite office for the needs, whether burial, educational, transportation, food, etc. Okay,
Thank you.
medical. Thank you.
One last item po, yung social pension for indigent senior citizens. Now, there are regional allocations for this, but there are also lump sum appropriations for both NCR and central office. So may we know again the justification for a separate lump sum item for the central office in addition to the regional allocations for this particular item, social pension for indigent senior citizens. So what are the budgetary requirements in the central office that could justify a separate allocation?
Yes, Mr. President, it's not a lump sum. I have here again the list per region, including NCR, and everything is here. And whatever is lodged in the office of the Secretary, in the central office, is just a standby fund for augmentation for the regions.
Thank you. That's all, Madam,
Thank you.
Madam Sponsor.
Thank you very much. Because of your interpellations, we're able to have the satellite office for protective services.
The next tormentor, interpellator pala, is Senator Lacson. Senator Lacson is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. The two items lang. If the sponsor of the budget will yield to some clarificatory questions, Mr.
Yes,
President.
Mr. President, to my vice chair,
Who always interpolates.
who always interpellates the chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Historically, yung DSWD is one favorite parking space, ng mga legislators. Si Secretary Tagawilo knows this. In fact, I'd like to commend her for standing her ground during the budget deliberation in the House. I'm not sure, hindi ko lang sigurado kung bumigay siya in the end. And I would like to find out. And if so, kung eventually bumigay si Secretary ng DSWD, I'd like to find out.
Ano yung binigay?
Ano yung binigay?
Yeah, but the memorandum circular remains.
Okay. She issued a memorandum circular which says that all of those who need to be helped don't need to be referred by a legislator.
Okay.
So everyone can access the services.
So I don't need to recall my commendation. Because if eventually she relented, then I'd like to ask for a breakdown of the budget by legislative district. Meron po ba?
We have regions. By regions. We have the breakdown.
By region.
We have the breakdown
But
here.
not by legislative districts, meaning by legislators.
No, we have the breakdown per region, as I stated to Senator De Lima earlier. Whether it's for the pension of senior citizens
So,
or
that's an
protective
assurance
services.
na walang soft project na nakapark sa DSWD by any legislator.
No, as far as I know, none. Region
As far as he knows.
Yes, but there's nothing wrong if a legislator refers someone.
Of course.
Yes, yes.
What I'm concerned about is kung legislator prepositioned na yung allocation sa DSWD na siya lamang ang pwede mag-identify.
Hindi, no, not to their knowledge.
Yeah. Then I have no further questions, Mr. President,
Okay.
Madam Sponsor.
Because there's an MC, give a copy of the memo circular. Pahingiran ng copy nito. Okay. Oh, itong dalawang circular.
Are you done?
Sino alam ko yung rules ninyo?
Tapos na. Abalik ka ba?
Pwede pa sa mga tulungan nyo, ha?
Meron?
Isama nyo sa model, yung pilot. Sa meeting yung PhD. Thank you.
Yeah, I was about to tackle the issue on unused appropriations, pero kalimutan ko na yon because... Oh, sige. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lacson, the Majority Leader.
Grace. Mr. President, move that we recognize Senator Grace Poe.
Senator Grace Poe is recognized.
Grace, tapos may babalikan daw si...
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a few questions for the DSWD. The area of my concern, particularly the supplemental feeding program for the children. I think that the DSWD is tasked to take care of certain daycare centers. I know that there was a 4.2 billion budget in 2016, but was now reduced to 3.42 billion. Is there a reason behind the reduction in the budget?
Yes, yes. Thank you. I know that the good senator, first of all, I welcome Senator Poe's interpellation and her asking us on the supplemental feeding program. That has been her advocacy, which I support. And in fact, earlier, we were talking about the convergence of the PAHP, the Program Against Hunger Plan, and it's a convergence of various agencies. We should include the Nutrition Council under the Department of Health. I did not see it in the convergence, but they assure me it's there, so that the DepEd as well and their supplementary feeding program. I am informed that there was no cut in the budget. It was just moved to the DepEd's feeding program.
So the DepEd feeding program has increased
Linipat niyo?
with the transfer of about $1 billion from DSWD. Is there a reason for this? Is the DepEd taking care of more of the daycare centers?
Yes. They fixed it according to age. If it's school age, it goes to DepEd in terms of the feeding program. And ito. Yeah. There's a decline in the number of 5-year-old children enrolled in child development centers because of the implementation of the Kindergarten Education Act and the Enhanced Basic Education Act, which is mandatory and compulsory kindergarten education. And for 2017, the target will now exclude 5-year-old children since they are assumed to be enrolled in the DepEd preschool. So 5 and up will be DepEd.
Will they be fed in the DepEd preschools? That's part of the budget you assured you.
Yes. So who are the beneficiaries? The 2 to 4 years old will be supervised neighborhood play, 3 to 4 years old under Child Development Center. So they assure us that all ages for the feeding program are covered, and DSWD and DepEd put together will cover all the ages.
So I just want this for the record. All 2 to 4 year olds in the child learning centers will actually be receiving, is this lunch, breakfast, or a snack?
Altanghap. Ito, hot meals composed of rice and viand.
Maybe I would just like to ask the secretary for a copy of the menu later on, maybe just for reference, ma'am.
Pwede na lang
Oh, thank you.
Ito, hot meals, rice and viand during break time, morning, afternoon, 5 days a week for 120 days.
And this is for all over the Philippines? All
Yes.
wow, that's fantastic.
In all daycare centers through the LGUs.
We appreciate this. Quickly, for the next question, is it true that the proposed 20 kilos monthly allowance for CCT beneficiaries, I guess this is 20 kilos of rice,
Of rice, yes.
was removed and then this was converted to cash?
Yes.
Has this been answered?
Yes,
the
this was
reason behind
discussed
this?
during the hearing. And this is, we're simply amending the manner in which the rice allowance will be given, and it's more convenient to give it as a cash grant.
Instead of
Because of the difficulty of giving the rice coupons, and the economic managers during the DBCC agreed that it would be more efficient to give it in cash.
Okay.
And that's contained in a special provision in the budget.
One last question. For the CCT beneficiaries, is there an effort from the DSWD to include a financial literacy program? There is. So,
Financial literacy, that is part of the program. Yes. Financial literacy is part of the program. Yes.
and we would,
Under the financial literacy is part of the family development sessions.
okay, may we also ask for a copy of that also for reference?
Can you
just in the
kindly give
future?
the senator a copy, a comprehensive report of your supplemental feeding program for not covered by DepEd? Second, of the family development sessions, which includes the financial literacy program.
That's
Correct?
all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Poe.
Thank you, Senator Poe. Any other tormentor? I mean, interpreter?
Tormentor. We have 4 minutes to go before the break.
Yeah, Majority Leader?
Mr. President, there are 3 more senators who are in line. That is Senators Tiveros, who forgot 2 or 3 questions earlier, and then Senator Gordon and Senator Recto, the minority leader. So we can take that up after lunch. But a few questions from Senator Tiveros, just as a wind-up before the break. May we recognize now Senator Tiveros?
Yes, Senator Hontiveros? No. Is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and Majority Leader. Forgive me, Madam Sponsor, I concentrated on the OSEC 4-piece questions, but I have 4 questions left, just right for the last 4 minutes before we break.
All right.
On the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Council,
I'm sorry?
if the Madam Sponsor would allow. Just 4 questions before we break.
Okay,
On the
yes.
Juvenile Justice and
Yes,
Welfare
thank you.
Council. So I'd also like to draw attention to the 2017 proposed budget of the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Council. I notice that the new general appropriation for 2017 is 85.554 million, a 25 million decrease compared to the 2016 appropriation of 111.084 million. May I know the reason that the proposed amount this year is lower?
This is a non-recurring item. Yes.
Actually, increase sa salaries. Increase say we have the data.
Yes, Mr. President, the reduction or the difference between 2016 and 2017 is due to capital outlay, which is a non-recurring item. It doesn't mean that the program will not be implemented. It's a capital outlay that was reduced.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. In that case, may I still be updated on the current number of children in conflict with the law in detention centers?
How many children are in detention centers?
Sila yung sa
You have the number of children in detention centers? They're finding the figures.
we have data children see
Halfway houses. The pag-asa houses. Not the same. Iba pa yung halfway houses, iba pa yung pag-asa
well we
center.
just did the diploma they have young at my choir sila under
Ilang taon na?
Duterte ka na.
Below 20. Below 18. Ilan? Okay.
sa bahay pag-asa.
Oh. Ano 14 lang? 635. There are 635. How old are these? 15. 15 below. There are 635, Mr. President, below 17 years old, only in the Bahay Pag-asa. But there are other children in halfway homes, in reception centers.
We have 1,432.
There are regional rehabilitation centers for the youth, for their there's 1,432 children in their other centers, apart from the 635 in the Bahay Pag-asa.
Sorry, Madam Sponsor, what's the second figure?
Children
1,432
in shelters
in shelters
for children.
for children, and the 635 are those in Bahay Pag-asa.
So for a total, Madam Sponsor, of about 2,000 or so known children in conflict with the law in various kinds of detention centers.
Yes, yes.
And I ask this question, Madam Sponsor, because that's just the quantitative of the phenomenon, but the qualitative is quite alarming for children's rights advocates. In a January 2016 article in Manila Times by Father Shea Cullen, the detention or such detention centers were described as follows. The children suffered 24 hours of confinement with no sunlight exposure. There was bad ventilation and dirty toilets, and the smell of urine pervades the place. The investigators asked for the case studies and social workers' reports, files, or records of the children. There were hardly any. Many children were unidentified and without birth certificates, and allegedly no effort was taken to find parents or relatives. One child was found to be only 8 years old. The floors and walls were dirty and one with graffiti. There were no programs for emotional healing, therapy, education, physical exercise, games, books, or any mental stimulation. The older boys in one center could touch younger girls. So these are probably
Are you
the
referring
worst
to
of the kind,
Yes,
of
is
the
this a
different kinds of
DSWD?
centers.
May I know where is the area?
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to quote the specific area described or the specific centers described by Father Shea Cullen, but from the description in his article, it would seem that these are the worst kinds or among the worst kinds
Are you referring
among
to
the
a
different
DSWD
kinds of
home?
centers. Again, these are, just as you described, different kinds of holding centers for these children in conflict with the law.
If
The
you
ones
could-
described by Father Shea are probably
Yeah,
the
but
worst
Father
kinds.
Shea already passed away, but perhaps his foundation, it would be good to find out where that area is, so
Yes.
it can be visited by a DSWD social worker. But you said that's
Yes.
January of 2016 yet.
Yes.
Ako, siguro.
I'll do that, Madam Sponsor. And kung ganito po kasi yung kalagayan ng
Yes.
kahit ilan sa mga detention centers, paano po kaya kung mayroong ganoong difference sa budget? Kahit pa maintindihan natin na dahil capital outlay na non-recurring,
Naintindihan
kung may
ko.
pagkakaiba dun sa budget for this
Yes.
year, incoming
Yes.
year.
Mr. President,
Senator
just as
Gordon
a-
wishes to
I don't-
intervene. He is recognized with the provision of Senator Taveras.
Yes,
Yeah,
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to put some credence into the debate here. The man you're citing, Father Shea Cullen, has a very dubious reputation, and I would not want you to soil the proceedings here because in Olongapo he is not accepted in Davao. He's been rejected. He's a professional fault finder. He makes money out of, he pretends that he's helping here at the expense of the Filipino people. He spreads lies all over Europe, and because of that, he's able to raise money. So I totally reject, and I don't normally intervene when somebody is here questioning, and I will, because I think we have all had enough of this man. He pretends to be a priest, but in reality, he is like Judas Iscariot. I don't usually use these words, but I'm taken aback. If you're going to use him, I don't think we should even listen to this. Thank you very much.
Mr.
Thank you,
President,
Senator
if I
Gordon.
may just very briefly make something of record, although it's not directly related to the budget, but this matter came up in our budget interpellation. I think aside from whatever various opinions we may hold of the person, I think there's value in his description of some of these centers. Practical value also, as the Madam Sponsor pointed out, for the DSWD to look into. And secondly, Mr. President, aside from the fact that the person we were talking about is already dead and cannot speak in his own defense, it is also, though there may be different opinions held of him among us Filipinos, among not a small number also, it is known that his work on behalf of children's rights was part of his life's work. As a foreigner, yes, but here in the Philippines, in solidarity with one of our many advocacies which has to do with children's rights. So, I don't know, Mr. President, is it proper to request that remarks such as dubious, professional fault finder, pretending to be a priest, and at least one other that I wasn't able to write down, is it proper for me to request that they be stricken off the record, or just out of respect for the memory of someone who is already dead?
Huh? Is he dead? Is he dead?
All right, so I stand corrected, Mr. President. He's very much alive, and therefore, Mr. President, all the more, a person's continuing life's work. I don't mind standing corrected on a point of fact, Mr. President, but I think it also stands to reason that a person's continuing life's work on behalf of children's rights should not be definitively smeared in our budget interpellation without prejudice to it being brought up by my colleagues here in the Senate in other fora. And I respect the opinion of the good gentleman from Zambales, but I would also like to put an alternative view on record about Father Cullen. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank
And
you.
I still, my inquiry still stands. If it would be proper for me to request that such remarks about him be stricken off the
You
record,
can
Mr.
always
President.
move, Senator.
I do
Ontiveros.
move. I so move,
And-
Mr. President.
All right. What does the majority leader say?
Mr. Chairman, I object. I have said that to his
Alright.
face, and I am willing to say it again to his face. This man ingratiates himself. This has been going on for so many years. He's a Columban. That's one of the reasons why Father Bob Garon left the Columban order. We gave him the Preda in my early years. In fact, in Accra Law, Bob Garon even came over and asked me to defend him. Justice Campos even asked me if they could get it, and I found out that when Bob Garon left for the United States, he took over the center in Olongapo, and afterwards he just kept on attacking, gathering data, spurious data. The DSWD is aware of this. He's been very, very critical of this country. You know, I rarely stand up with passion against the Catholic Church. And he is not the Catholic Church. I'm sorry if the gentle lady has a different opinion about her. I just want to make sure that this hall of Congress doesn't listen to charlatans or people who come in here in our country pretending to save the country as if we are sinners in this country. I'm sorry. If you want to take it out for the record, I'm even willing to filibuster it if you're going to continue to do this.
Mr. President,
I'm not
Yes,
continuing
Majority
to
Leader.
do anything, Mr. President. I just made a motion.
in reply to your query on what the majority leader says, we have an objection to the motion. I will have to support the objection because it was not said about a colleague. I don't find anything unparliamentary on the comments, Mr. President. It's like a privileged phrase or speech by Senator Gordon, so he can call anybody like that. Yeah, I've heard worse words about presidents and even other public officials in the hall. As long as it's not said about a fellow parliamentarian or a fellow senator, I don't find anything. So we will have to divide the House at this point, Mr. President.
All right. There is a motion to delete the adjectives in description of Father Cullen, and there is an objection. The majority leader has properly called for a vote. Okay, so we shall now have the vote. Those in favor of the motion to delete the phrases mentioned in the course of the intervention of Senator Gordon, say aye.
Aye.
Those who are against the motion say nay. Nay. The chair rules that the nays have it, and therefore the motion is defeated.
Thank you, Mr. President. What I will continue to do and conclude to do is to ask my last question to the good sponsor. Madam Sponsor, considering, still on this issue of the children in conflict with the law, considering that the President has been vocal about his desire to have Republic Act 9344 amended in order to bring down the age of criminal responsibility to 9 years old, and that the House has made this part of its priority legislative agenda, we might expect a spike in the number of children in conflict with the law should the bill be passed. Though I was so happy, Mr. President, to hear Madam Sponsor's statement that she too would oppose the bill. Harinawa, hindi naman mangyari, but would our detention centers be ready for this spike?
We hope that government is always ready to serve our people, children, teenage kids, or elderly. And we don't anticipate that the law will be passed, but even if it does, amid our opposition to it, I am certain that the DSWD will be prepared to implement the law.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Madam Sponsor. And I look forward to our working together against the passage of that bill.
Thank you.
Thank
May
you.
we request for a
Ontiveros.
luncheon break?
Yes, Mr.
Yes.
President, I move to suspend the session until 2:30 this afternoon.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion, the session is suspended to be resumed at 2:30 this afternoon.